So here's the quote. The values of that machine are now so ubiquitous that we treat them as if they were as natural as rain or wind. Progress, openness, an objection to limits and borders, therapeutic individualism, universalism, the rejection of roots, place, and history, pure materialism, the triumph of reason over superstition, scientism, commercialism, and the primacy of market values. All of these go up to make all of these go to make up the unseen and unquestioned value system within which we live, and to which we feel there is simply no alternative. So within this unseen and unquestioned value system, obviously, is our economic system, which, as it turns out, certainly plays a very profound role. And so last week we began to consider the implications for Orthodox Christian faith of the capitalist economic system in which we find ourselves. We will return to these implications and to the capitalist value system, which replaced the pre-modern communitarian moral economy, which henceforth I will usually refer to simply as feudal later. Today, I'd like to begin to look more closely at the history of capitalism and how it came to replace pre-modern economic systems. One aside, there's something called distributism, which is a more modern idea. G.K. Chesterton wrote about it, as did other theorists. They were trying to find a response to capitalism, the negative aspects of capitalism that would be closer to what a Christian economic system might look like. Obviously, there are huge problems with communism. So again, to reiterate, I think I'll do that again here in a minute, but just because we're looking at capitalism doesn't mean we're suggesting that communism is the answer. That's not at all what I'm saying. I just think it's important that we look at capitalism because that is our, most of us in the West, that is our economic system. And it's going to have an impact on our lives, substantial, and on our faith. And it's something that I think most of us don't consider enough. I know that I personally do not, and that in my experience, most people do not. So that's why I want to discuss it, because it's one of these unseen forces that definitely affect us. Before I begin, however, I'd like to clarify what I mean by capitalism as well as what I mean by the pre-modern communitarian moral economy. I'm not an economist, and I'm aware that there is a great deal of nuance to terms. That said, I think the following working definitions are honest and helpful to use as a baseline. So number one, capitalism is an economic system that shapes a way of living according to which the energies of life are channeled into endless striving, where individuals pursue opportunities in open markets, where innovation replaces inheritance, and where value is measured in growth, efficiency, and the power to choose. Its spirit celebrates the self-made, the competitive, and the ever-expanding, and turns the world into a field of opportunities to be seized and reshaped. And two, pre-modern communitarian moral economies, on the other hand, offered an economic system in which the rhythms of work and exchange were woven into the fabric of kinship, duty, and shared meaning, where the measure of prosperity was not individual gain, but the harmony of the community, the sufficiency of all, and a life ordered toward goods that could not be bought. While these definitions might lack precision, they offer a fair summary of the kind of culture and value system that each economic system generates. Just as no technology is ultimately neutral, because its very functionality tends in a certain direction, no economic system is neutral or pure, since once it encounters reality, human nature pushes it in a certain direction. So where did Western capitalism come from? What did it supplant? How did this process come about? And why does it matter? I'm going to begin with the last question first. Actually, let me go ahead and Okay, just wanted to check. I'm going to begin with the last question first. For a Christian, the economic system that one uses matters because it can have an influence on the likelihood that one will fulfill Christ's commandments. To clarify again, as I said just now, I'm not advocating for communism. God gave humans free will so that we have the free choice to respond to Christ's commandments or not to. I'm completely opposed to the coercive use of power on the individual and corporate level. That said, one does not have to be a communist to recognize that an economic system that prioritizes the personal accumulation of wealth is one that does not tend towards the care for the other that characterizes Christianity. Nothing resembling capitalism is encouraged by Christ in the Gospels. On the contrary, Christ offers many teachings and parables that criticize this very accumulation of wealth. This is not only a problem because the focus on the personal accumulation of wealth runs counter to the Gospels, but also because an economic system that tends towards the individual tends away from any sense of responsibility to the community. Again, my interest is not in advocating for any particular economic or political system, but rather to understand the systems in which we find ourselves so that we are better able to live the kind of lives that Christ calls us to in the Gospel of Matthew. And then I've got an extended quote from Matthew 6. Do not lay up for yourselves treasure on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And if you were in church yesterday, you would have heard another gospel reading, which dovetails nicely regarding the creation of barns to put excess wealth into. The timing was kind of remarkable, providential, I felt. As I mentioned before, trying to compare the psychological situation of people in one historical era with the psychological situation of people in a different historical era is a fool's errand. That said, we live in the wealthiest society in the history of mankind, and one would hope that all of our wealth would afford us a certain amount of financial security. Unfortunately, it appears that this might not be the case. For example, according to a recent survey, 77% of Americans do not feel financially secure. And as an aside, I didn't put this into the blog post, but I could have. I have been surprised to encounter conversations with wealthy dodeca millionaires, millionaires who have over $100 million who were concerned about their financial situation. So clearly, it appears there's no amount of money that is sufficient for people to feel secure. So financial security is, of course, a vague term having perhaps as much to do with one's psychological state in the story one tells oneself about the world as it does with reality. Christ knew that humans would never find ultimate security in the safety nets and insurances of the world, and instead commands Christians not to worry about material concerns. We also know that God works through other people to care for us, and if there is one difference between pre-modern and modern man that we can be sure about, it is that there has never been the kind of loneliness and isolation that we experience in the modern world. Humans need one another, and as Christians who proclaim a Trinitarian God, whose persons empty themselves in love for one another, we know that this kenotic love lies at the foundation of reality, and that it should lie at the foundation of any Christian endeavor. So that's the end of the first section. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or concerns? Greetings. Good evening, Peter and Paul. I will continue unless there is something that anyone wants to add. And I would be interested, you can maybe put into the text chat, if these are questions that you have wrestled with, and if so, what have your conclusions been? These are not things that I thought of at any great length, really up till now. I haven't had cause to, I guess. There are always certain topics that one's more interested in, and economics was never a topic that was at the top of kind of my interests, but it certainly is a very important one. And it became clear in reading Kingsnorth's book how central a role capitalism has played in the development of the world that we find ourselves in. So I think if we're going to understand where we're at and how we got here and what we might do better in the future, looking at economics is important. Which is why, this distributism of G.K. Chesterton is kind of interesting. And there's certainly other Christian economic theorists that have discussed these kind of things. And there's a new book actually by Dylan Powman. I'm hoping to reach out to him and maybe have a conversation with him about his book. You can find it at Ancient Faith. I can't recall the title. It has something to do with the common good, but it's essentially economic thought in its relationship to Orthodox theology. So getting back to my post, where did Western capitalism come from? What did Western capitalism supplant? How did this process come about? The roots of capitalism go back 1,000 years or so to the feudal era, when wealth was tied to land and status rather than to markets. Economic life was local and bound by custom, obligation, and moral limits. For example, the just price doctrine rooted in Aristotle and developed in the West by Thomas Aquinas. Trade existed, but merchants were usually at the bottom of the social ladder, and earning money through a market economy was looked upon with suspicion. This was at least partially because the merchant class was seen as not producing anything real, but instead capitalizing on arbitrage. That said, the seedbed of capitalism was being laid through the development of towns, guilds, and banking during the late feudal era. The earliest capitalist era began around 1400, along with the age of exploration, where both technological development and political incentives led to the development of expanded international trading networks. The necessity to raise capital to fund this exploration led to, among other things, the development of the joint stock company and bills of exchange, as well as other new financial tools such as insurance and double entry bookkeeping. The age of exploration inaugurated the first real international race for strategic advantage, which is something that will become a characteristic feature of the modern world. The arms race, the space race, the current artificial intelligence race. As power and wealth shifted away from the land and toward capital, the merchant class became increasingly powerful. And another aside, I didn't write about this, maybe I will in the future, but the incredibly catastrophic wars that we experienced, especially in the 20th century, but even prior, the Civil War, the French Revolution, the different religious wars in Europe. These were all, at least most of them, if not all of them, uniquely modern wars, especially the wars in the 20th century, because you never had, first of all, certainly the kind of technology, but also the kind of worldwide, that's why they were called, obviously, world wars. And you didn't have world wars prior because societies were not as connected. So because of the connection that was possible, made possible through the age of exploration, the opening up of markets, all these things can be tied back to, traced back to capitalism. Obviously, hasn't been all bad, although even the good things that we get from it, there are certainly, it's a mixed bag, at least. So if nothing more than seeing that the things that we get is true of technology, it's true of all the things that we've created, really, there are obviously a lot of unintended negative consequences that we get, and we often don't appreciate them or can consider them because we think, well, there's no other option, and there always is another option. So the age of exploration inaugurated the first real international race for strategic advantage, which will become a characteristic feature of the modern world. As power and wealth shifted away from the land and toward capital, the merchant class became increasingly powerful. In the book of Genesis, soon after Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden, we read about the rise of Babel in the construction there of a tower that was intended to reach to heaven. The history of humankind is replete with accounts of the rise and fall of empires, each of which develops through the centralization of power and wealth. The difference with the modern era is that ours is the first time that these developments have taken place on a global scale. As with the rise of ancient empires, it's worth pointing out that it was only because of the emergence of new technologies that the large-scale projects of the age of exploration became possible. So advancements in boat building, weaponry, and cartography in particular. The struggle for strategic advantage incentivized the increasingly connected nation states to centralize power and wealth so as to subsidize increasingly ambitious projects. At its root, technology is a lever, and I plan to address the spiritual consequences of this truth in a later installment. This idea of technology as a lever that enables humans to do things that they were previously unable to do. In the case of the economic system, as the competition between nation states ramped up, the size of projects, exploration, trade, warfare, etc., grew, which hastened the need for huge amounts of capital, which in turn hastened the development of a capital-based economic system. To compete with other nation states, governments increasingly spent money that they didn't have, which they borrowed from banks that continued to aggregate power and wealth. A great irony can be discerned in this historical development. It could be argued that the feudal system was undermined and ultimately destroyed so as to provide for the greater good. So as to protect itself from the ambitions of other nation states, each nation state needed to aggregate the wealth of its own people so as to keep itself from being enslaved by other nation states. By destroying the feudal system, however, the nation states enslaved their own people to the state, upon which every citizen would become increasingly dependent. So that is the blog post from yesterday. Good evening. Good evening. Good to see you. So in some ways, I feel like I'm just getting started. Each week as I'm reading and writing on this topic, I realize this is going to take more than a week's worth of writing. So I'm not in a huge rush. The study of Kingsnorth's book chronologically will continue on Thursday evenings, although not this Thursday because of Thanksgiving. So there won't be any engagement really in the next week or about next week with the book. The thematic study, I'm releasing those videos and those blogs on the Protecting Veil YouTube channel and Substack. And I haven't been doing a lot on the Protecting Veil channel in the form of vlogging. So this is a kind of a new endeavor. I will certainly continue to release videos from interviews and conversations, but I do plan to do more vlogging and writing on topics that bridge the gap between the church and the world, which is also my interest with Gadfly Academy. With Gadfly Academy, it's a little bit less explicit, less explicitly theological. And then certainly on the Protecting Veil channel, we'll be looking at theological topics. So we will continue to do that. It is 8 o'clock. If anyone has any thoughts, concerns, I'm afraid I might have upset a few people. I keep coming back to, the reality that just because one criticizes capitalism doesn't mean that one is necessarily that I am necessarily suggesting that we need to change our system or that there's a better system. I'm still figuring things out. I do think that it's important, if we want to understand our world, that we understand where capitalism came from, what its values are, and the more I consider it, the more obvious it seems that the value system is in large part antithetical to the gospel. Good night, Arlene. Good evening. Thanks for being here. So, but maybe it's the best that we can do. So we'll see. This is a conversation that I want to continue to have. I look forward to speaking with Dylan Palman because he is someone who has spent his professional life on this question as an Orthodox Christian, and he actually started a kind of like a think tank, an Orthodox think tank dedicated to Saint Nicholas Kavasilas, for the study of orthodoxy and social thought. Debt is the backbone of our system, not good. Right. Well, this is the in a sense, it's kind of a diabolic, if you zoom out and you look at the big picture, you can see before the age of exploration, you had these certainly warring groups, obviously Sparta and Troy, famously had their battles and stuff, but it was local, it was small, it was not global. And so the evil was bad. Even the Roman Empire, was compared to the American Empire, the Roman Empire was very modest. So, and then back then also, you had most people that lived out in the country and farmed and so on. So there was a great strength in local communities. And what's happened as the world has gotten interconnected, all that wealth in the local communities has been sucked up by the nation states in a battle out of distrust for one another, and this just kind of continuous aggregation of wealth and taken out of debt to pay for this, and we see it in the current conflicts, and it is a problem. It is a problem, and it's something that, if you want to understand the world, you have to consider. So that's all I have for this evening. Thanks as always for being here, and have a great Thanksgiving. And we'll see you probably briefly, maybe next Monday. Like I said, I'm not going to have a lot. To prove that I am a capitalist, I will continue to plug the Gadfly Academy merch store, which will only be open for a few more weeks. So there should be a link in the show notes. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.